Hello.
Our story begins in the rusting industrial sector of the top side of Coruscant's massive city. The Ecumenopolis was bursting with life, and out from the Jedi Temple left one of two shuttles. A story of master and apprentice was approaching its next chapter. Of what fate, the master did not know. Yoda was informed by Master Yaddle that his former student seemed to be on edge about the death of Qui-Gon. Everyone was, because many, despite disagreeing with the Jedi Master, adored his company. Jedi were not supposed to harbor attachments, but no one wanted to see him die at such a young age. Dooku, to Yoda's surprise, took up very little interest in Obi-Wan, so little that he wasn't even sure if the two of them had ever met. And as for Skywalker, it seemed like Dooku felt just as indifferent to him as he was Kenobi. Chances are he didn't even know Anakin was brought into the temple, because of how much of a ghost Dooku had become. Yoda had thanked Yaddle for passing the information onto him, because he planned to follow his student, which is what he did. Despite being Grand Master and having an entire order of students, knights, and masters to watch over, Yoda always, throughout his career, tried his best to make time for every single student he personally mentored through their Padawan years. He had lost all of them to natural causes, but Dooku, and he was hoping to reconnect what had been lost. Something changed within his student. When it was, Yoda didn't know, but the shift in their bond had been plaguing him for years. It's why he noticed the indifference Dooku had towards Obi-Wan. Dooku swiftly moved across the city of Coruscant and landed in a shabby and broken down structure. Yoda, using a much smaller vessel, planted it on a small perch overlooking the hangar bay. The Jedi Master skipped down the walk after tapping on his control console, informing the Jedi Temple to check in on him if he did not update his location in the coming 30 minutes. He shouldn't need that much time, but you never know. Yoda certainly didn't know what Dooku was doing here. As he got closer to the bay itself, he noticed that his former student was talking to someone. The shadowy figure looked like a Sith, and with Qui-Gon's recent and untimely death, the threat of the ancient religion seemed more likely than ever before in Yoda's life. He treaded closer, but quietly did so, ensuring that he could hear as much of the ensuing conversation as possible, though part of him wished that he hadn't made the choices he did. It was clear that Dooku was upset and consoling in someone over Maul's actions. The Jedi had learned of the Sith's name by examining a data log inside of the vessel Maul hid on Naboo. Yoda became frustrated and even a little angry. Had his own student helped the Sith in killing Qui-Gon Jinn? Yoda knew how much Dooku adored his student, so he didn't think it was likely, but it still sounded like it, even though Dooku was angrily confronting the Shadow Man. Yoda continued to listen as the conversation played out. There were references to Dooku's mistakes and the things he had done. The voice of the other man was distant but large. It came out small but slipped under your skin like a snake. Yoda had heard enough, and he stepped out from behind the ship inside the bay, telling his former student to stop what he was doing. Tyranus turned around, starstruck and confused how his master had followed him. Of course, the Sith Lord assumed that he was lying, and trying to cover his tracks by doing so. But Dooku was just as surprised as Sidious was. His confusion slowly shifted as he realized what he needed to do, because behind him, his new master told him that if he wanted to prove his loyalty, he must kill the Jedi Grand Master. Palpatine had spent his life loathing the Jedi, and in this moment, he could absolutely take control over this fight and engage the Jedi Grand Master. But at the same time, Sidious knew that it was an unnecessary risk. Dooku and Yoda had plenty of experience with one another. Plagueis was dead, and he couldn't risk destroying the Sith to fight Yoda out of lust for killing him. He needed to calculate his efforts. If Dooku died, then he would be a useful diversion. If not, then he was worthy of his time. Tyranus turned to the little green Jedi and thought on his choices. Before him, Yoda tried to reason with his student, drawing on their past and attempting to bridge the gap between the two of them. Dooku admitted that he was afraid, but not of his current path. He was afraid that it was too late. His lightsaber ignited, and Yoda watched in pain. The boy he cared so much about had betrayed the Jedi Order. It felt like slow motion to him, watching someone he had known for 70 years attack him. Dooku got closer and closer before raising his lightsaber and aggressively swinging down at Yoda. The Grand Master backed away, igniting his own weapon, finally at the last second and defending himself. He bounced up and collided with his former student. Dooku was a strong and talented duelist, but only one Jedi defeated Yoda, and it was not Dooku. Their weapons, green and blue, lit up the chambers, neither individual getting ahead of the other. Yoda didn't want to hurt Dooku, but he was going to defend himself to the end, if it came to that. The Jedi Grandmaster held on to the hope that Dooku could turn and see the right way forward. Their sabers slid through the air, dashing against each other. Yoda didn't fear for a moment his control over the battlefield, but he could sense all the resentment his student had for him, bubbling up throughout this fight. It was like Dooku needed to win this to prove something to himself, and Yoda wasn't going to give him that chance. This wasn't out of spite, but because the Grandmaster needed to defend himself and survive to inform his peers of the Sith Lord he just found across the city from them. Yoda jumped off of the ship Dooku used to get here and slashed down into the ground, launching his student off of it. This wasn't the finest move Yoda had ever used, but it put some distance in their fight. Unlike Yaddle, Yoda took no responsibility for the Council's actions, and whether or not they led to Qui-Gon's death. This was not arrogance, but because the reality is, the Council wasn't technically in the wrong. Sidious, Dooku, and Maul were directly responsible for Qui-Gon's death by aiding the corruption of the Trade Federation and encouraging the angst of the dead religion only Sidious now served. Yoda told this to Dooku because joining the dark side would not bring Qui-Gon back. It would only ruin what Jin stood for. Yoda may have not seen eye to eye with Qui-Gon, but he was one of the finest Jedi in the entire order, and Dooku's actions directly went against everything his own student tried to sow into the galaxy. This pissed Dooku off more than anything, and he channeled the dark side. He lunged across the room and slashed at Yoda, who defended himself quickly. Their weapons connected and grazed at each other. No matter Yoda's small stature and the strength of Dooku's strike, the Grandmaster was not deterred. As their duel dragged out, forcing Yoda to become more aggressive, the reality of the student's fate became sealed. It was the last option Yoda wanted, but he wasn't given any other chance. Every attempt to talk down Dooku was reciprocated with more anger, more aggression, and deadlier strikes. Yoda could sense the building darkness, and instead of letting his own student deform himself, he, out of love, moved to end Dooku's life. Tyranus was a hero in many ways, but he was about to live long enough to see himself become the villain. Yoda slashed away, parrying and aggressively switching into offense. Dooku was unready for it, believing that his master would surrender his life so that he could live. But Dooku was incorrect in that calculation, and he paid for it immediately. Yoda lobbed Dooku into the vessel behind him and threw his lightsaber at the same time. The student felt a strike of pain rise up his body, and his eyes drifted down to Yoda, and then to his new master. The lethal blow was exactly the same spot where Qui-Gon had died days before, but something else caught Dooku's attention. Over a decade of loyalty that never happened played out in front of him in his mind. He watched in real time Sidious slowly turn and walk away as he moved for his own escape vessel. Yoda didn't even chase though, he moved for Dooku's side. In these final moments, he realized what he had wasted. His life of service to the Jedi and to the light were for nothing, because he had betrayed the Jedi Order. Dooku fell to his knees, and Yoda grabbed his hand. Sidious was closing in on an exit, but Yoda still didn't leave. Instead of being left behind, he was embraced because Yoda always cared. Dooku, seeing clearly for the first time in years, communicated to his master, telling him to find Kamino. Those were his last words, before the Force embraced his body. Yoda left following this, and behind him, Dooku's body disappeared in the thin air, saved by his student. Sidious stepped towards his vessel and walked up its ramp, and then the vessel shattered from inside out and imploded, sending a shock at Palpatine and throwing him. When he looked up, Yoda's saber was already ignited, and he was speeding towards the Sith Lord. What Sidious didn't anticipate for, in the scenario that Dooku lost, was the rage he would summon from the Grand Master. Yoda was the most well-rounded Jedi in the last 1,000 years, but what he could become was unknown. Dooku never knew Yoda to have a temper, or an outburst, but killing his own student brought something out of Yoda. Sidious never expected it, and he defended himself rapidly. His weapons ignited, and he retreated quickly. Yoda was a true threat, and Sidious, already unguarded, didn't know what to do. He struck and heartily defended his life, but there was nothing he could do. His weapons sped aggressively to counter the attacking Jedi, but his defense wasn't much. Sidious could sense it. The light that sat so present, so openly when Yoda first arrived had shifted. He was utilizing his darkest self, which wasn't even far into the dark side. Their weapons sizzled at collision, and Yoda pounced off the wall, slamming down and crushing Palpatine's blade, and with it, his hand. The shock left him perplexed. He never should have betrayed Plagueis. This was karma from the afterlife. Yoda gripped the Sith Lord and raised him off the ground. Yoda's brow firmed, and he imagined Dooku's lifeless gaze looking back at him. The face of a man slowly shifting into the face of the boy he started training decades before, and Yoda pulled outwards. From the inside, Palpatine's body erupted, and he wailed in agony until his lifeless mannequin dropped. Yoda wouldn't ever speak of his actions, and the report he filed would be one that didn't accurately display his actions in the destruction of Sidious. The rage he could wield forced him to fear himself, and as a reaction, Yoda took a vow to change himself, to fully accept the light and transform his own life. The Sith were dead, and Yoda would gladly take the burden of betraying himself to cause their destruction. But he needed to remove himself from the Council so that they, with a clear conscience, could best represent the Order. Yoda would return with confusion over Dooku's body disappearing, but it would be interpreted as the darkness releasing its grip and letting him go. It didn't make sense, but some monks believed that Palpatine had cursed the Jedi Master, which led to his betrayal of their ways. Dooku was brought into the Force because he accepted the light upon his death. That's what they internalized as the truth. The Grand Master's final acts would be promoting Windu to Grand Master, leaving the Master of the Order role to be determined by the Council. Yoda would leave, first stopping the production of the clone army on Kamino, and then vanishing to commit to bettering himself. And that, my friends, is, did you really think I would end it there? I'm ppsw, we're just getting started. 25 years after the destruction of the Sith, the galaxy was brewing with tension. Yoda hadn't been seen in an equal amount of time, and the Jedi Council started to reason that he had died during his trip into the galaxy. They knew he was plagued by something, but what, they were unsure. The High Council looked much different than it did when Yoda left it. The first Master of the Order was Luminara Unduli. Mace believed that she'd make a great fit, being that Master Catry had honored the will of the Council during her tenure. Luminara served temporarily for 10 years. When she left, the formation of the new Council was started. Now, at the helm were Mace Windu and Plo Koon as two Grand Masters. Shaak Ti served as Master of the Order, with Coleman Trebor, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Caleb Dume, and Anakin Skywalker serving as members of the High Council. The other faces around the room were Opa Rancisis, Saesee Tiin, Yaddle, Even Piell, Kit Fisto, and Barriss Offee, who replaced Luminara after finishing the training of Gnodi. Ahsoka was a Jedi Master by this point, and had been offered a seat, but rejected it after training Kaduni. Depa Billaba had also died during a mission to the Outer Rim. She, in her dying breaths, wished for her student to reach the High Council. Caleb at the time was in the middle of training Gungi when this honor called upon him, and he would accept it with grace, this being very similar to how Tyvoka placed Plo Koon on the Council to fill his role. Caleb joined before becoming a full Master, but he, by this current point, had finished Gungi's training and started the training of Ezra Bridger, all while remaining on the Council. Thanks in part to Master Unduli's position on the Council, Anakin received more guidance from their ranks, which assisted him with speeding through his youngling and Padawan training. He was not married to Padme, but he and her did link up a few times after he became a knight. Wink, wink. It made things easier for them, because they weren't bound to one another. There was room for a real relationship, but Anakin's duty to the Order superseded that, because without the Clone Wars, there were much different missions for the Jedi to partake in. These missions, unlike the war that never was, were more akin to Anakin's motivations. They revolved around freeing slaves and fighting off scum in the underworlds of several star systems. Toshera is one of the many worlds Anakin and Ahsoka spent months at, fighting off Syndicate powers. The first few years after Yoda's departure carried a lot of the same mundane movements of the Council, but it shifted with Mace using more control for the betterment of the galaxy. They started to understand more of Dooku's grievances, and without losing themselves, pushed for more assertive movement from the Senate. It's directly the reason for two Grand Masters. one to oversee Senate relations and one to oversee the Council's body. Mace took on the burden of interacting with chancellors and so forth, while Plo Koon remained steadfast in maintaining a complete circle of trust with the Order and the Council. While the Jedi couldn't do much in the way of actually changing the influence of the syndicates, they could provide more intel for Republic defense operations. Training ships did exist, and the Republic actively worked to take down pirates in their territory, but taking the fight to the syndicates themselves was pretty unheard of. The first of these groups to really be hit were the Zygerians. This was something that firmed Anakin's loyalty to the Council, and specifically to Luminar Unduli. She headlined the movement, before it was picked up by her peers. The Zygerian Empire fell to the Jedi once before, and they crumbled nearly instantaneously the second time. Republic forces, under defense contracts, were moved to the planets controlled by the Zygerians and took them. These strikes were completely unexpected, but they led to even greater unforeseen transitions. See, while the Jedi were amounting into the perfect religious sect, their enemies were making moves to counter them. The invasion of Naboo was a terrible day for the Trade Federation. It costed them billions, and it embarrassed them in front of the masses. To add to that catastrophe was their trust of the now missing Sith, and the capture of Newt Gunray and his right-hand man, Rune Hako. They were shady, but they also led during one of the most profitable times of Trade Federation history. So the board of directors that led the corporation under the Viceroy's command were left without direction. As a result, they called upon some of their war dogs for inspiration. The voice they called upon was Captain Zeta Maximus, one of the premier fleet commanders in the Trade Federation Navy. He had honed his skills through absolute domination against pirate and criminal forces in the Outer Rim. His Lucrehawks were obviously more sophisticated than whatever his enemies threw at him, but still, he won without much struggle. Zeta Maximus was as cruel as he was cunning. His militaristic strategy and vicious mind worked like a plague. He could cut through the minds of the elite academy brains without a second of hesitation. He just didn't because they weren't at war. Much of Zeta's positions, though, went against what the Federation was going to ask of him. Thanks in part to Dooku missing, there were several key star systems that never revolted from the Republic. There was a minor separatist movement, but they eventually just surrendered their hopes for a more prosperous future, so that they could remain leisurely in ties with the Republic. It was more comfortable that way, especially compared to attempting to challenge the mighty Republic. Dooku was instrumental in raising a movement to counter that system, so without him, it never grew. This meant that the interest of the Trade Federation shifted. Without Palpatine's protection, Gunray and Haka would be placed in maximum security prisons for the rest of their lives. The board decided to take the loss and move on without them. As a result, they moved Zeta Maximus into their headquarters and proposed their all-out war against the Republic. Zeta, despite his vengeful demeanor and his hatred for the Republic and Jedi, believed that their actions would go too far. The board of directors believed that they should align themselves with the criminal syndicates of the Outer Rim. This came after immense changes within the Senate. The blockade of Naboo followed new tax laws on free trade lanes. It was a whole thing, but it encouraged their movement against Naboo. It failed. Now, Valorum and Palpatine were gone, and the Senate with new leadership from Chancellor Masameda was implementing more taxes on trade. The Federation would be taking the brunt of this, because of their actions over Naboo. The other minor companies that didn't attack a free planet were given a chance to catch up with the Federation. Essentially, the Republic was penalizing the massive group and allowing for more competition to brew. Whether it was right or not, it didn't matter. It elicited a reaction from the board of directors. They believed that if they used criminal territories to boost their revenue, they could bury every other corporation that the Republic was trying to replace them with. This went even further, because many on the board knew that the syndicates had aspirations for greater power, and the Federation did as well. Hell, Zeta Maximus had his own private delusions of grandeur, so he couldn't act like he wasn't slightly giddy about the potential here. They had plenty of time to make moves in secrecy, because the Republic would be tracking them openly. This is where Captain Maximus came in. The Republic wouldn't bat an eye if his fleet was seen deeper within criminal territory, because his reputation was that of a vicious killer. They allowed it because it meant that part of the private sector was handling something the Republic didn't want to put money towards. From there, as the board of directors directed, Zeta would cooperate with the powers that be within these circles and sell the business of the Federation. As a note, every captain who worked for the conglomerate was also an expert of dealings and contract work. It was part of the job description, because strength in the field was only valuable as strength in the offices of boredom. So Captain Zeta Maximus departed from Keda Nemodia and swiftly entered Hutt space to begin the hunt for alliances with those that the Trade Federation traditionally would have deemed lesser than individuals. While it would take years for the Federation to stretch itself across the Outer Rim, they had the power, credits, and influence to unite each of these powerhouse syndicates. The irony, though, is that Captain Zeta's movements into Hutt space would 100% be responsible for Jedi involvement in the Outer Rim. They used it as a source of inspiration for their own goals of uniting the region under Republic protection. The Federation didn't understand why the Republic became interested in the furthest rim from the core, but it came directly from Zeta Maximus entering Hutt space. This didn't mean the Federation stopped what they were doing, it just meant they hid themselves better. The Syndicate saw the infinite value in an alliance with the Federation. Like the Nile, generations before, this binding unity would give them the resources they currently didn't have. If the Federation wanted to use their assets to give the Syndicates a leg up, then they would take it. Though what became a common theme as years of mutual respect continued was that none of the Syndicates wanted to betray the Federation. They were all at each other's throats for decades after the fall of the Nile, and what did that get them? A couple systems that the Republic didn't care about? That wasn't worth it. They wanted something more, and now they had their opportunity to claim it. Trust had to go all ways, and because it did, this plan seemed perfect. Individuals like Jabba the Hutt were able to inspect the battle droids, test them on local rebels, and even iron out strategies. The Republic blissfully operated without a military, and they would pay the price for it. Obviously, they had defense contracts and a couple of ships that did whatever, but nothing would be able to stand up to this threat. Inside the Jedi Council chambers in current times, Anakin stood before his peers. He and his former student had finished their study on another development of the Outer Rim. The 35-year-old Jedi Master, despite not holding a position of structural importance like Grand Master, was the face of the Order. The Council readily pushed him to the forefront after his quick ascension through their ranks, which he accepted with grace and just a little bit of pride. Anakin informed his peers that he and Ahsoka had found 3 points of interest across the Greater Javin, the Arcanus Sector, and the Tion Cluster. Master Ahsoka stepped up as she addressed the Council, informing them that as per their wisdom, their search into Federation activities was correctly placed. The trade conglomerate had multiple points of interest, and the 2 Jedi found that industrial facilities had been placed on several planets. It identified an interest from the Order because syndicates wouldn't just allow anyone to use their planets. While no Jedi knew about the deal made between the Federation and the syndicates, they had been following an investigation led by Barriss, Ahsoka, and backed by Anakin. This started during Ahsoka's Padawan years, and after Barriss started training Genodi. Both Jedi believed it to be odd that the Federation would willingly place themselves in danger by moving into Hutt territory, for example. The legendary Captain Zeta Maximus had the full support of the Republic for financial reasons. They didn't want to spend their money, but the resources the Federation needed to continuously plant themselves in the Outer Rim seemed against their customs. No Jedi believed that they would go in there for a sense of moral change to try and help those people. Even losing the nefarious Nute Gunray wouldn't shift the Federation so drastically. Anakin moved to his seat as Ahsoka, his prided student, took the stand and propped up a hologram. On it were marked locations across 3 previously mentioned minor sectors of the Outer Rim. She expressed that there was clear evidence of collusion between the Hutt crime families and the Federation, though what she found peculiar is that where they saw collusion wasn't in Hutt territory. As a matter of fact, it belonged to a hidden Black Suns outpost that the Jedi had been feeding intel from. The Jedi, as a side, collected information on these syndicates and relayed it back to defense coalitions so that they didn't get blindsided by accidentally stepping on a syndicate outpost. The Jedi weren't weaponized enough to make moves at all these locations. Aside from their full-blown attack on Zygeria, these other syndicates were much more spread out. Regardless, the point being, the outpost was run by the Black Suns. A Hutt was present, and the Keda Nemodians were building industry in the same location. Surely it wasn't a coincidence. The Council moved into deep thought, as Ahsoka suggested that she and a group of knights lead an investigation at the location. They agreed to the suggestion, requesting that Skywalker and Afi accompany them. At the same time, Masters Windu and Trevor would inform the Chancellor of these changes. Surely the Republic could have some sort of counter. The following week would be very brutal. A total of 26 Jedi Knights followed Skywalker, Tano, and Afi into the Outer Rim. Most of them did survive, but the crushing loss of one of their members had the Order reacting with vigilance. The Jedi moved in on a recon mission. Master Tano was the lead of that mission, and she took the loss of her friend heartily, but it came with a great realization. While this outpost wasn't outfitted with all the details, they found documents. The Federation, despite being a part of the Senate, was sitting in an alliance with each dominant power in the Outer Rim. The Syndicates let the Jedi sweep the Zygerians, because it gave the Republic a false sense of comfort. If every crime family could fall as quickly as the Zygerians did, then they wouldn't be concerned. But because the Republic never checked that, they allowed a fully militarized syndicate to grow under their noses. With Trade Federation resources, the Jedi found what was still an inaccurate number of an apparent 200 million battle droids in post-production, with another 14 million on the way, not to mention the variants, the battleships, the tanks, and so on. This was a military force larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen, and the Republic didn't have the resources to act on it. Shakti activated an emergency inside the temple. Protecting the interests of the younglings was a priority. A majority of the temple was evacuated within hours of this discovery. The younglings would bunk up inside of T6 shuttles and entirely fill out the Crucible, fleeing for Ilum. Instructors called it a training exercise. Older Padawans with a number of knights who didn't volunteer to stay behind were sent to 3 locations: Tennu, Tython, and Ashes Rei. Those who stayed behind were under Shakti's jurisdiction as she waited for a decision from the Council. Now, the Syndicates knew about the assault at the Black Sun outpost, but there weren't any data leaks, so they were content with knowing that the Republic didn't know about anything. So in a secret meeting between the Chancellor, the Minister of Defense, and the Jedi Council, they discussed actions going forward. Everyone present felt rather hopeless. They were dwarfed by the immeasurable size of their enemy. But in moments when the dark feels too much, or when hope seems lost, that's where stars are created. The Council, brewing with fearful elders, had a young member, the youngest among them, take a stand. Caleb Doom, who had been protected by Anakin since Depa's death, spoke before everyone. The young Jedi was often quiet and reserved. He felt much guilt over his master's passing, and often offered a soft hand and voice inside the council chambers. Anakin mentored him about loss after Depa's untimely fall. It was a little overprotective, but Caleb genuinely appreciated it. He, though, suggested that they don't fight, that they use a tactic that no enemy would suspect. At this current point, the Syndicates didn't know what they knew. They would be on edge, surely, but if, say, they manipulated their hardware, they could perhaps avoid conflict or even set it to self-destruct. The Jedi were flabbergasted by this, but quickly, Barriss took his side. For the elders of the council, it was hard having so many young faces inside their chambers, but that's why they were there, to keep them on their feet. Barriss added that surely they had a failsafe in case something went awry, like on Naboo. Caleb cut in, suggesting that with an army that large, they wouldn't have just one failsafe. But perhaps, as they avoid this conflict, they use their external contacts and wrap around the legs of the Alliance. They could then bring it down by its knees or even hit them in their Achilles. Caleb looked around the room and eyed Skywalker in a seemingly excited state. This was right up Anakin's alley. Caleb turned back to the room, now on the edge of their seats. He believed that even a centralized attack could throw them off guard. Mace gestured forward, like a Jedi assault without backup. The Chancellor cut in, informing them that they would have backup. Caleb nodded. He believed that they should rapidly spend as many resources as possible. Call it humanitarian work so that Lat Dad and his allies didn't think about it more than twice, and then zero in. Hire thousands of Anzellans if they needed to. They were droidsmiths by reputation. Hell, even Caleb knew a droidsmith named Jabo Hood, who stole a couple dozen battle droids because they were on his home world at Lago. Surely they could work something out here. Anakin shot up with excitement, but the Chancellor, not seeing him, spoke first. They would do this. Obviously, more needed to be discussed. that they would essentially blow their budget for, firstly, something they didn't know would work, and secondly, on something that the public had no knowledge of. It would look really odd. Mace and Anakin interrupted, both saying at the exact same time, "Who cared?" They had adopted similar mannerisms when speaking about politicians. The others in the council referred to Windu and Skywalker as the Terrible Twins. Anakin placed his hand on Mace's chair and leaned over, telling the Chancellor and the Defense Minister that the soul of the galaxy was at stake, and he was worried about the budget. This was war, not a luncheon. Well, that wasn't what the Chancellor wanted to hear, but it worked. He delegated the Jedi and Defense Minister to quickly get to work, reach out to every contact, and offer them thousands to millions of credits. He then looked to Anakin, then to Mace, telling them both to take it out of his own bank account if they needed to. The Jedi quickly removed themselves and got to work. The Syndicates and Federation were none the wiser. Zeta Maximus was overseeing the next leg of fleet production, which would be adding the Lucrehulk Mark 4.7, which was bigger, sturdier, faster, and stronger. It would be the deadliest ship in the galaxy upon its construction, which it was finished. It had a wider rim than some planets, and he called it a bland, corny name like the Enforcer. What ironically became the play of the Federation is their complacency. They had spent the last 25 or so years slowly building up a military, and they saw more under-the-table riches than ever in their lifetimes. They were swimming in credits, and thus, they were spending them. Zeta wasn't as involved in this as the board of directors or the current viceroy, but he was the only one sensible enough to understand that they hadn't won anything yet. Every time he told his peers, they threw credits in another vessel at him, which kept him quiet. Unlike the board, who were invested in the shiny penny, Zeta was bought by big, powerful ships. The ring of the Lucrehulk that he had now, the Enforcer, was wider than some moons. It was a construction that basically took the top and the bottom off the Death Star, and made it a bigger version of their blockade ship. It wasn't just a warship, but pretty much was. They built it and placed it over the lead industrial planet for the Federation, which was Geonosis. The Enforcer was parked right inside the asteroid belt. It was angled weird because of the belt, and the fact that Zeta didn't want his ship getting destroyed by a rogue rock. This was their defense at Geonosis though, and they believed nothing would get through it. Zeta would be responsible for a target attack on a nearby Jedi base, killing a dozen or so Jedi. This to him made their strike at the Black Sun outpost even. He hadn't even considered the assault at the outpost to be a reconnaissance one, because the Republic didn't even budge. So to Zeta, he was shutting the Jedi down by slaughtering a couple dozen in one go. He was keeping them away from their territory. While it wouldn't directly affect the Federation, something that started to become clear was Zeta's belief that he was better than the board. He was surrounded by droids all the time, and they kept telling them that he could destroy them if he wanted. The board, that is. Zeta was the key to everything. He knew it and they knew it. Therefore, by proxy, he was their leader. It wouldn't change anything, but it made him feel more powerful. About 2 months following the revelation of information the Jedi learned and Zeta's attack, the Republic was primed for action. Lat Dod would go first, killed by a pill in his drink, thanks to a bounty hunter hire named Embo. The Jedi would work on their own attack. The entire council, along with 1,000 Jedi Knights and Masters, would present themselves at Geonosis. It would be a blindsiding attack, not one inside of an arena, but across dozens of facilities on the planet. What the Jedi did not know is that the Elder Grand Master, Yoda, had become aware of this assault. He could sense the great building of tension from his old order, and had a very informative vision that gave him insights into when to help his friends. Yoda had become so close with the Force that he was basically a part of it already. The 900 or so year old Jedi Master manipulated the Force to display the most legendary use of battle meditation ever seen. From nearly an entire galaxy away, Yoda blanketed his old order with protection, battle awareness, and focus that they needed. None of them would know it came from their former Grand Master, but the battle meditation would help. The morning would start in terror, as the lead squad of Jedi bursted through a defense platform for the Trade Federation on the surface. Battle droids in orbit alerted Zeta to this uproar. He awoke from a drunken night of excessive partying, because this day came following Caedonamonian cultural celebration. Zeta hadn't seen any other sentience in years. He was plastered when he woke up. though he ordered all fighters to retreat from the station and sweep the surface. The Jedi, working underground, would remain protected. As hundreds of Jedi worked through the machinery of the droid foundries, hundreds of thousands of battle droids were activated. The Jedi warriors had messed with the sensors, forcing the Geonosians to send their battle droids into the wrong locations. Inside the facilities, the bugs were getting squashed. Because even though Mundi didn't serve on the Council anymore, he still brought in the flamethrowers. Geonosians were no Wookiees in his eyes, and they would pay for it like it was personal. The battle droids had been prepared for all-out war, not interior hall battles, and the Jedi used formations to excel themselves through combat inside these corridors. Battle intensified inside the Hive, with a squad of temple guards led by Sinjalik and Kit Fisto making a push for the Queen. They wouldn't kill her, but they needed her to force her warriors to surrender. Above the catacombs, Oppo Rancisis used the Force with a couple of other elders to break down the structural integrity of a main foundry, crushing thousands of active and inactive droids. Warriors of small stature like Yaddle and even Peel leapt from droid to droid, providing allies behind them a chance to move forward with less risk. Each Jedi assault across the desert world was different from any other. Every team lead had a different approach, and brilliantly, all of them worked because the Jedi had prepared this for months. However, there was one missing element, one that required the drunken Zeta Maximus to make a terrible mistake. It already happened, and with the Jedi already moving through hyperspace, having anticipated Zeta to move slower, a Jedi fleet arrived out of hyperspace to attack the massive ship. Aided by N1 starfighters given over by Senator Amidala and hundreds of other volunteers, the Jedi, led by their best pilots, started the assault on the Super Lucrehulk. There were no specs to go off of. They just knew it had to have a weakness, and with all the fighters deployed on the surface, they had a window of opportunity. Mace Windu, Anakin Skywalker, and Saesee Tiin would lead this assault, the three of them being the most elite Jedi fighter pilots in the Order. The other Jedi who followed them here were also considered elite pilots. Their assault began with heavy flak, but the Enforcer was not designed to repel fighters, because it had so many of its own that could dock within it. Zeta, who was curled up hurling into a toilet, had no time to react. As it turns out, for Zeta, hangovers weren't nearly as fun in his 50s. He agonized as his droids, which were acting relatively dormant, tried to rally together a defense. The turrets on the top vessel did what they could, but the nimble Republic and Jedi fighters avoided their attacks. Anakin made a push for the interior of the hangar bay, only to find that his little cheat code from Naboo had been removed. This caused him to have a strenuous return to the outskirts of the vessel, but as he was making his move, a call came from out of the system. The Anzelans, Jabba Hood, and hundreds of other droid smiths in the galaxy had cracked the code. Droids inside the Enforcer called for a full-scale invasion of the galaxy. 205 million battle droids activated and spread out. With hundreds of different call signs to deactivate the droid forces, Republic heroes did what they could to stop the attack on the galaxy. Now, some of their attempts to repel this did fall short, but overall most of the droids were shut down, thanks to open channel communications, which typically would be used for surrendering. The sentient and droid leadership never suspected a thing, because how could they? 1 or 4 missing battle droids per system or couple systems would be impossible to track, especially because they had to account for defects, bad chips, and so forth. So the Jedi, in the 2 months before this attack, were able to get all the information they needed to counter the massive droid army. Would-have-been battles were immediately de-escalated, and on Geonosis, the fight for control over the capital of Syndicate territory was underway. The Republic obviously couldn't account for movements from the Syndicates. Luckily, they were the reinforcements, so none of them were meant to be active during the first wave of assault. Jedi on the surface of the desert world clobbered through battle droids, but they just kept on coming. It was 1,000 Jedi versus 1 million battle droids, and none of the codes were working. Not only were they not working, but the droids didn't stop multiplying, and with the Jedi and their sentient bodies starting to buckle under the weight of tiredness, they were saved. Every time one of them started to falter, they received more energy. Yoda, a galaxy away, was saving every single member he could, giving over every ounce of his life so that they may succeed. Over the planet, the Jedi and Republic fighters received their first wave of resistance. Fighters from the surface returned and dogfights began. This made the surface cannons on the Enforcer a little more effective at what they were doing. The Jedi were actively searching for weaknesses, and it wasn't becoming visible until Master Tin clocked something. He called to his fellow masters and highlighted a weakness on the neck of the Lucrehulk. Because most of these variants had much smaller sizes, they didn't need to have overextended necks. This one had such a thin neck because the ball in the middle was supported by other wings, though these were not as strong. What Sacy suggested was a targeting of their shield generators, which required a strike inside the facility, and then the external attack on the neck. Anakin volunteered for the interior assault. He'd be joined by 3 other Jedi. Down below them, Master Doom crossed with Master Ophi, and they realized something. The reason these battle droids didn't react is because they had to be shut down via console, so the Jedi quickly shut down the first control stick they came across. It worked perfectly. However, there was a slight problem, because even though these droids were lever controlled, they still had innovated since Naboo. The 2 Jedi quickly informed their peers across the facility that every single control node needed to be shut down. Judging by their logistics inside the bridge, there were 2 more, one out near Master Opa Rancisis and the other closer to Master Kenobi. The Jedi quickly moved, as Barriss and Caleb prepared to defend the room they held at the current moment. The fighting in space intensified, with another wave of fighters joining them, but Skywalker and his 3 allies were able to completely disable the shield generator in almost no time. They just needed to run, quickly. Zeta Maximus was finally getting to the bridge, and activating the defenses necessary. Instead of having full shields, they were disabled when he got to the bridge, and he frustratedly moved his droids to find the Jedi and slow them down. Meanwhile, every vessel needed to protect the neck of the ball and its wings. The Jedi were already acting though. With every single torpedo saved up for a volley at the neck, sure enough, it cracked nearly instantaneously. The Jedi then doubled back to protect the other fighters. This would aid the volunteers with another volley that would crush through the system, and fleeing as soon as they took their shots. The Republic fighters rose and fell again, unloading everything from torpedoes to cannons, and it worked. The neck was pressed into oblivion, separating the ball from the main facility. The wings weren't strong enough to hold it, because pressure forced the ball to move away from the rest of the vessel. Not to mention, the core was inside the main ball, and without the reactor, the rest of the ship went dead. Anakin and his peers ran from the facilities, but they were chased by battle droids. One of the Jedi were shot, and Anakin turned to save them, but they, with all of their strength, used the Force to throw Anakin out of the room as they were executed by battle droids. The other 2 Jedi helped Skywalker to his ship, and they sped away. Explosions soon followed, and the main ball would detonate from a reactor overload. So much power was needed to operate the vessel, that once the core was removed from the rest of the ship, all of its power funneled into the main ball, causing it to ripple. Nearly at the same time as the Republic fighters made their escape, Kenobi and Rancisis got to their panels, deactivating them and turning off every single battle droid across Geonosis. From every B1 to every Vulture droid, the entire Federation force on Geonosis collapsed, or dropped out of the sky. The Jedi had won, and while the jarring revelation of the assault that would have consumed the galaxy would be revealed, there were some minor repercussions of this assault. The Federation board was killed in their sleep by an overpaid Jango and Boba Fett team. This left the criminal organizations without order, and a few of them made their own assaults. As was stated before, not every code worked against the droids, so the Republic lost territory, despite having an overwhelming success early on. So some criminals tried to capitalize off of it, and in the end they would pay the ultimate price, but they would have the mild satisfaction of enjoying some semblance of victory before it was swept out from under them. The Jedi would be the ultimate heroes of this war, but those volunteers who served across the galaxy to stop the Federation on their attack day were also commemorated for their efforts in maintaining the peace. There would be 250 plus casualties after Geonosis, and the Jedi would memorialize those who fell. While they didn't, and never would know it, there was one other Jedi who had fallen. Yoda had given the last of his life to his order. In his solitude, he became a vessel of the Force, and used every ounce of himself to protect his Jedi in battle. He died the second the droids collapsed, having sensed the instant relief across the planet. The Jedi were triumphant, and thanks to the young minds of the Council, they found success before they were destroyed, as a galaxy, as an order, as a republic. The following few years would resemble those following Yoda's departure, the only difference being that Palpatine became the Trade Federation, and the dark side, or the Sith, were the criminal syndicates. The criminals would take much more time to weed out, but with the Republic establishing a semi-permanent military, the Jedi wouldn't have the burden of doing it all themselves. The reaction to the war would be surprise, but it would also result in a massive backlash against the other mega-groups, like the Commerce Guild, the Banking Clans, and the Techno Union. Despite remaining neutral and never siding with the Federation, they would directly pay the price for their size and their influence. The chancellors down the line would continue to prevent these powers from achieving too much influence over governing, which would safeguard their future. Anakin and his friends would maintain their positions, both on the Council and in the Order. His lineage was a very influential one, and as the old guard slowly moved on, either stepping down or passing away naturally, he was able to take up the position of Grand Master, next to Grand Master Shaak Ti. Barriss would preside as Master of the Order, as Shaak Ti moved up with Anakin. Ahsoka would eventually fill a missing seat with another joining counselor. With the Sith destroyed and balance returned to the Force, Skywalker would happily live out the rest of his life, giving his adoration, love, and attention to an Order who had done right by him. Their movements into the future would be full of progress. The Republic drifted into a new golden age, and with it came the inspiration to the people of the galaxy that was the Jedi Order. And that, my friends, is actually the end of the story. Special thanks to all the patrons:
Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Jack Silver, There Are Cars, The Shade of Fear, Prismatic Warlock Master, Lyndall Asher, Schmoobs, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot 36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, General Alexander, Robin Roberts, Blackie Chan, Alexander Arista Beginning and End, Django Fat Clone, Nick 5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pyramark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir Wellen 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewoo 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Jedi Naguin, Zanza Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calig, Youngling Slayer 66, Magnetic Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Fortis Legacy Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, the main three first names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing.
For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. First things first, Yoda being a total menace. Ketamine Yoda was introduced, and he absolutely went nuts. He went berserk. He destroyed. I think there's a quote from Dooku where he says, if Yoda used the dark side, he'd be the most powerful being ever. And I kind of wanted to tap into that. Just Yoda just absolutely tapping into the dark side. Not even going full into it, just tapping into it. I just thought that'd be really fun to use. And I wanted to use that kind of intro to move into a much wider story, which is why the story is so long. But the second part of the story, or the main part of the story, is kind of just going forward without the Sith. And I thought that'd be a really different and interesting approach to this story. I know I had a little fake out, which was, for jokes and all. And I had the idea of using the Federation to kind of continue pushing towards war. I don't think the Separatist movement would really get anywhere. I think the Federation would really be the only one to try and push for conflict. And I think going the route where they go with the criminal syndicates would be the most interesting way to go. One of my favorite aspects about the story was just honestly the build of the Jedi Council, and kind of surrounding with different members. You got Caleb Dooms, your Barriss Offees, you got Anakin on it. It's like a really cool council, and that was like a lot of fun to build. And then having like the younger aspect of that council being the reason that the Jedi and the Republic survive and actually are able to win the war is kind of what the fun irony in that is, that the old guard isn't necessarily responsible. It's the young group that comes in and completely changes the future for the galaxy. So I hope you all enjoyed this story. I hope you enjoyed the different direction it went in. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.